Greetings from the Dark Continent. Conscious Caracal here, and welcome back to Stream of Consciousness, Episode 8. Today, I'm talking to a very special guest, K.M. Breakey, an author from Canada, and he's going to talk about his latest book, but also some of the work he's done. And then we're also going to delve in a bit into the idea of just crime in South Africa in general, and we'll see where that goes. Now, KM, can you tell me, why should the audience care? Who are you, and why should they give a fuck about who you are?
Good question. Well, first of all, my name's KM Breakey. I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, and thank you for inviting me. And just a quick shout out to the Rational Gent, a common friend of ours, and he's the guy that kind of put us together and made this happen. So very happy to be here. As you said, I have written a book. I have written a book called Never, Never, and Never Again. It's my fourth novel. It's set in South Africa. It's about South Africa. And, I think most of your audience will understand when I say there's no rainbows and no unicorns. It is truth. It is factual. It is reality, gritty, message-based fiction. And it pulls no punches. So, it's my fourth novel. It's the second novel I've done where I really do go after a message and an area of discourse that's not being explored authentically in the public square. And that's what I did. And we can talk about the book and what it's about in due course. But I'm in Vancouver. I have the freedom to do this. I have the ability. I say I'm remiss if I don't do it. So that's where I'm coming from.
Right. And I think it was Jordan Peterson that said, when it comes to writing fiction, you shouldn't start off with a message. You just start writing a story. The message will reveal itself in time if you're a good writer. You bet. And I mean, the subject matter of this book, and actually, before I even get to that, I want to mention some of the books that have inspired me. Read extensively Wilbur Smith, great fictional author, writes a lot about Africa, particularly South Africa. Book called The Covenant by James Michener. James Michener wrote over 40 books, epic books, and The Covenant was one of his best. Set in South Africa, actually covers 15 millennia. So it goes back 15,000 years to the first peoples of South Africa, and we can definitely talk about who was where and when. It's a big topic. But Michener's book covers, right? Especially with the idea of land. That's the big question, is who was here first and when did who arrive here? But continue.
Well, and it's not even a question. We all know the answer. We just know that it's not being portrayed as such in the mainstream media. But to get back to Michener's book, which was an inspiration for me, he wrote this book, covered 15,000 years, most of it in the last, say, 100 years, but it ended because it was published in 1980. It covered up to, the late 70s. And as much as it is an accurate portrayal, a lot of interesting things, to say the least, have happened since 1980. In fact, the country doesn't even resemble what it once was back in the 80s. And to give that book a little bit of street cred, a friend of mine, a guy I'm sure you've heard of, his name's Simon Roche, who he helped me a great deal in my research for Never, Never, and Never Again. He brought that book to my attention. I'd read it like 3 times, of course, but he gave it the stamp. He said, listen, that book is not perfect, but it's pretty damn good. It's a good read. It's fairly authentic to the Afrikaner message, history. So for me, Never, Never, and Never Again kind of picks up where Michener left off. Starts in the 70s. It follows, like you said, you've got to start with people and stories, not with message. And that's what I did. The book follows across several decades an Afrikaner family. There is a mix of Britishness in the book. I do explore, the characters explore the historical conflicts between the Boer and the Brits. It's made very clear ultimately that, that was bad, but boy, oh boy, it's ancient history. There's bigger fish to fry right this moment. So it covers this family right through transformation, through the quote optimistic Mandela years, and it kind of there's an inkling of there's a menace always lurking. There's always a menace lurking In the 70s, it's distant. Everyone knows it's there, but it's not in your face. The fences are lower. The security is far less. And through the 90s, yeah, it's getting a little worse. It's getting a lot worse. And then right up until present day, where now it's I mean, we know what it is now. It's not pretty. And my book, it does cover, it's published in January 2018. It literally covers right up until January 2018. And the last president that is in my book is Jacob Zuma, who knew that he would be gone about 2 weeks after I published the book. And this savior named Ramaphosa would come along, and there'd be a new ANC, and boy, it's suddenly gotten about 1,000 times worse. So that's the message.
Right.
It shows the history, and it shows what happens to real people. And ultimately, not to give too many spoilers, but there is tragedy. There is violent conflict and tragedy, and you cannot write a book about white South Africans without introducing that, unfortunately. So that's the book. And it's, I sleep better at night knowing I wrote it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, right. But I'm interested. Well, I'm glad you brought up the idea of tragedy, because I made a video a while back about, I called it "Je mag trots wees Afrikaner," which translates to "You're allowed to be proud Afrikaner people." And I had a comment down there from an Afrikaans girl that said, a lot of these pictures that you showed and a lot of the art that you showed makes it look like we were just people that fucked up other people and did a lot of fighting and shooting and punching. And then I said, well, yeah, if you want to survive in Africa, I wish our history meant that in the 1600s and 1700s, you could survive in Africa by giving people hugs and singing Kumbaya and writing some songs and books. But that's not the reality. And making a video showcasing that, for example, the Boer War and the Great Trek and Blood River, it's not celebrating the war and the fighting and the killing itself. It's celebrating the virtues that come to the fore in those moments of tragedy and those moments of absolute stress and frustration. And I think that's a very superficial understanding of war. When someone thinks that, for example, a film or a book that showcases a lot of war scenes or showcases war is just there glorifying fighting and killing. It's not. A good book actually looks at the virtues that come to the fore within those moments of absolute, almost like anarchy or chaos. The question I have for you is, what interested you in South Africa? I mean, you're sitting up there in the cold north of Canada. And what attracted you to our little country, our little shithole country down here on the southern tip of Africa?
Yeah, well, just like I said, I've long been fascinated by it. And, I didn't know in the 80s, like, let me take you back to the 1980s. And I was liberal. Back then I was about your age. And I was watching South Africa, and I knew that there was a white minority that ruled the country and this oppressed black minority. And I knew what the mainstream media was drilling into my head over and over and over. And it was one message and with no nuance. One message and one message only, and it was captured in pop culture, movies like Lethal Weapon. There was a white South African was a perfect villain in that era. So I was just fascinated, and I was wondering what would happen to this white minority. There was 5 million whites, and at that time, I think, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but maybe 30 million blacks or maybe 20 million. I mean, whites were, I think, 25% at one point.
Yeah.
And then Mandela, and just, I started to realize that there was a tale being told which was very, very superficial, to tie into what you said with your video. And people are looking for that catchphrase. And what it is right now is that everything is the fault of white people coming into countries like South Africa, like Canada, like America, and basically oppressing the native population and imposing their way and taking all the resources. So what that, I don't know if you can hear that car alarm, after telling you before the interview that we have no crime here. Where was I? Yeah, so when whites arrived, for example, in South Africa, in Cape Town, 1652, what was there? Well, There were a few San people walking around, hunter-gatherers, no blacks. Was there a country called South Africa? Was there a country with infrastructure and societal
no.
structure?
Well, that's the thing. You have to understand, South Africa has never really existed as a country. It's always been this unity of different tribes and different people.
Yeah.
And
Well, the country that I know did exist.
Have some ruins. You have some ruins of like cities built from rock somewhere, but it's not anything substantial, because you have to remember most of the tribes in South Africa were nomadic, and they built a lot of their structures out of like clay and straw and plant material. So not a lot of it survived, but also the black population in South Africa also moved down into South Africa from the north. So it's not like it was, for example, this developed states with a lot of infrastructure and city states and walls and
no potential, not even potential for that. That's where I was going.
Yeah, because the majority of the country is a desert where you can't survive without a borehole.
That's right. So I mean, you say South Africa, it did not exist as we know it as a country until the whites arrived and settled. And you know, we talk about why were they oppressing the native people? And the problem is the cultures were so markedly different, and there was so much aggression that there was only one way to be, and that was to isolate and defend and try to carve something out. And that's how it worked. And I mean, there was no one man, one vote possibility in 1652 or in 1852 or even probably in 1950. Like, I mean, this just, the cultures are so different, so blatantly incompatible. And now we, you know, everything that the Afrikaner people worried about and warned about is coming to fruition now, as this utopian state has been imposed by the world and from the fighting within, and we just see it unraveling. And where will it go? I mean,
and a lot of people don't understand that there's a big difference between settlers and colonials. So the British were colonists. A colonist means they come to a country, they colonize it, and they just send all the resources back to their homeland. A settler is someone that fucks off from his homeland and says, I don't want any part of this. I want a new life somewhere else. And that's what the Afrikaners were. They weren't sending resources back to their mother country. They were living here in South Africa looking for a better life. For example, the three main factions within the Afrikaner community, the main like ethnicities where it comes from is Germans, Dutch, and French. Now, the French Huguenots is an interesting one because they also came to South Africa fleeing religious persecution in France. So they came here, but then they also, and it's partly a mix between their own desire to assimilate, but also they were forced to assimilate, where the Dutch that lived here said, you can come live with us, you can be part of our communities, but you're not allowed to create French schools and French churches and bring your culture here. You have to go to our schools and our churches and speak our language. And they did. And they perfectly assimilated. Now, today in the Afrikaner community, you have a very large chunk of people with French surnames, but nobody in South Africa speaks French. Yeah.
Interesting that you bring up Huguenots. I call them Huguenots, probably mispronouncing, but that is my heritage as well. My dad's Irish, born just outside of Dublin. My mom's actually Irish heritage as well, but her family moved to Australia. So, you know, my parents actually Melbourne, Dublin, and we settled in Vancouver, which coincidentally and blessedly are three of the most peaceful and first world countries. Well, maybe not Dublin, but very peaceful. And it's the cracks are appearing as we bring in new cultures and new incompatible cultures. You talk about the Huguenots or Huguenots coming in and different language, a lot of parallels in the culture, but yeah, different language, different cultural traditions. And they assimilated very nicely and very quickly, and life was good. With all this like mass immigration and migration and invasion, some say, into Europe and America and South Africa, with cultures that are you know, very incompatible, and the numbers are such that the hope of assimilation is next to zero.
Yeah, the pressure is not being put on them to assimilate. They are being accommodated. Their little no-go zones and their communities are being accommodated. They're not being, as the Dutch did, where they told all these immigrants that, yes, you're welcome to come stay in our communities, but you have to adopt our value system and our language. And we don't see that today, not from my perspective.
No, we don't. I mean, we have legislated policy. Justin Trudeau's father, who was also, I don't know if you knew this, Pierre Elliott Trudeau was a prime minister of Canada in the 70s. And he instituted into law multiculturalism. There's written into our law is multicultural language, and that's what I was brought up on. I grew up, and not only do we have multiple cultures, we preserve them. We actively preserve them, and as a result, I went to Italian days. I went to Greek days. I went to the Chinese parade, Chinese New Year in February, and it was great. Everyone got along. Now, what's the difference? There is a difference, and it has to do with incompatible cultures and volume. So, yeah, what you said is absolutely true. They're not being asked, or they're certainly not being dictated to. They're not even really being asked or expected to assimilate. They're carving out their own little ethnic enclaves, islands of I call them islands of dysfunction.
Up there for a bit. Just repeat that last thing. You just broke up for a second. Just repeat that last idea.
Well, I'm just saying how they without that encouragement to assimilate, these ethnic enclaves are forming, and they're very, they're dysfunctional, and in some cases they're becoming no-go zones. We don't have that in Vancouver. We do in Toronto, mind you. There's certain, and that has to do more not with immigrants, but with the black population, and Jane and Finch is an area, I'm told, Toronto, by the way, is my birthplace, that you go to Jane and Finch with white skin after 11 p.m., it's probably not such a good idea. Again, we don't have that in Vancouver. Like I say, what is the hallmark of true Western civilization that I cherish? For me, it boils down, it's really simple. It's safe streets, opportunity, and a high trust society. I guess the more you have these enclaves and these different incompatible coexisting communities of culture, the less trust there is. And then if you have some communities that are bearing animosity to the host culture, if I can use that phrase, you're going to have a problem. It's a recipe for disaster. We're seeing that in America. We're seeing that on steroids in South Africa. Some would argue, what is the host culture?
That's a big problem. I'm glad you brought up the idea of trust, because I think that's my own observation about South Africa, is that we are an incredibly low trust society. And I might even go as far as to connect that to our diverse society idea of, you have to look back at tribal humanity. So now back in the day, in ancient times, if you were staying in your little tribe and this group of people come over the hill and they don't look like you, they don't talk your language, they don't think like you, they don't have your value system, they're probably there to kill you and take everything you have. They're not there to come sing Kumbaya and give you a hug.
There's a good chance I don't want to roll the dice.
And that's why I think diverse societies have such low trust, because we are hardwired not to trust people that are too different from us. Now, it's a sad reality of life. I mean, I wish it wasn't like that, but we are living in a time where we can't afford to look at the world as we want it to be, but rather as it is.
Yeah. So what you said, it starts to become controversial, because you're not supposed to say that. Everyone is supposed to be equal, and there's certain things that are not to be said. And this, by the way, is it's the thing that crystallized my third novel, which is Johnny and Jamal. I can't remember if we were talking about this on the air or before we started this interview, but I mean, that was really my red pill moment. That was 2014. And Ferguson, Missouri, Michael Brown was shot, and the whole hands up, don't shoot narrative was born and propagated and pushed, relentlessly drilled. And it was false. It was false, patently false, but it's still out there. So, what's being asked of us, to tie that back to what you're saying, is we can't treat anyone differently. But everyone knows it's in your blood, it's in your central nervous system, if you're walking in an area and there's so many of these no-go zones in America, you know, and I've been in some of these situations where everyone is black and you're the only white face, and you're in danger. You are in danger. And if you don't believe me, and if you think, and when I say you, I mean the collective you, not you, Caracal, just tune into Colin Flaherty. Tune into Colin Flaherty. I had my red pill moment by watching and observing, and then I discovered Colin, and I said, there is this false narrative, and there is this unspoken truth about black on white violence in America. And by the way, I already have experienced it because, you know, in the 90s, I'm a software guy. You know, I'm a software guy first, a writer second. I'm switching that around lately, by the way. But in the 90s, I traveled a lot, and really right through to the mid-2000s, all over America. And I had issues, as I mentioned, in places like Kansas City, Miami, New Orleans, Vegas, where just unprovoked rage and hostility, and for one reason and one reason only, and that was white skin in the wrong place at the wrong time. And you know, there are these danger zones. You guys have them all over the place. You guys know danger zone is anywhere outside, you know, the fenced compound you live in. But there are danger zones in the U.S. and starting to emerge in Canada, certainly in Europe, where there's no warning signs. And if you are a tourist in the wrong part of the world and you happen to go, you know, you're going to be in big trouble. So,
right.
You know, I don't know when you can't even name the problem, and you're not allowed to. Everything I just said is a little outside the Overton window, the things that are acceptable in public discourse. When you can't even name the problem, you have no hope of solving it.
Well, yeah, but that's the core idea of, for example, AA meetings, is the fact that if you can't even admit that you have a problem, there's no way you're going to recover.
Yeah, absolutely. The analogy is 100% perfect. So that's, I mean, and that's partly why I write the books. And you know, if you ask me to distill in one sentence my motive for writing these, it's to red pill liberals. And one thing I do, I mean, there's a lot of books out there, as you know. There's a lot of books about South Africa. There's some great ones. And the ones that are telling the no unicorns, no rainbows truth, correct me if I'm wrong, they're nonfiction. There are a lot of good nonfiction books, and they tell the truth.
Definitely.
And you know, but what I'm doing, and where I think I'm differentiating myself, and again, why am I doing? I'm not doing this to get rich. I'm not doing this for anything other than I sleep better at night doing it, and I feel a need to do it. But I'm doing it because when you tell a fictitious story with characters that the reader has bonded with, there's, you know, you actually see through their eyes what they're seeing, and you actually fall in love with this Afrikaner family because they're such good, honest, upstanding human beings. And you see what happens, and that's an eye opener, and that's again that's my motive, is red pilling liberals. And believe it or not, the majority of liberals, not all of them, but the majority that read my books, they're sympathetic. They get it. I've had a couple that reject everything, and they're so indoctrinated, so brainwashed that they can't get past anything. Their radar goes up too quickly. I'm thinking of one reviewer in particular who put down Johnny and Jamal after you know, a third of the way into the book, and said she could not accept the premise that a group of black teenagers would be hostile to a white couple at 11 p.m. at night. And
well,
you know, I told
that's the idea. I think that's almost like the left's sickness, is the fact that they only accept and they only want to see the world as they want it to be rather than how it is. And I think this ties in well with what Shiva said in the chat. He says one man's terrorist is a communist's freedom fighter.
Well, that's very true. It is all relative. By the way, that's interesting because, you know, there is an Afrikaner family that's followed in Never, Never, Never Again. But I wanted to show all sides, and there are strong black characters with a lot of depth, and we track them right through from the 70s, where arguably from their perspective, they are freedom fighters. there is a threat to them, and that's called the white minority, and their perspective is completely shifted. Of course, Mandela is referenced many times in the book, and he's an inspiration to this character, and we see that character's evolution, and we see from I can hear my phone ringing there. People are chasing me down. We see this character's evolution from, say, 1994 through 2017, and just how the corruption of the ANC. I mean, there was never any hope. Here's something. I know you know this. ANC is not historically a political party. They are a freedom-fighting / terrorist organization, depending on your perspective. So how is it that miraculously in 1994, they are no longer a freedom-fighting / terrorist organization? They're a political party. Well, that's what happened. And everyone didn't bat an eye. They're a political party, as are, INF and all the other ones. Catholic Freedom Party. Notwithstanding the fact that the deep communist roots and the Soviet influence, and how could they possibly capture a democratic society? I mean, coming from what they've come from, there was no hope. There was no hope. I do give a lot of credit to Mandela in the book. There's the man, there's the myth, and the myth is an absolutely beautiful thing. And he did have a lot of power to sway large groups of population, white and black. And, you weren't around in 1994, if I do my math correctly. I don't think you were.
I was a child.
You were. Yeah, there you go. But no. I claim there was, really tempered optimism among the white population in the 90s. But I think everyone in their heart knew this does not have a chance. This does not have a chance. And there's that, as I describe those scenes, there's that in people's hearts, and you can feel it. You can feel it. But there is a desire. We want this. We want this. We don't want to be the world's demon anymore.
I'm glad you brought up the idea of communism, because what a lot of people don't know is that the ANC is made out of a tripartite, the alliance of COSATU, the South African Communist Party, and the ANC. So it's no secret that a third of the ANC's power base is the South African Communist Party. And the ANC, in their own manifesto, they subscribe to the Soviet theory of the National Democratic Revolution, which was the Soviet theory that said that the Soviets and the global communist movement, if you will, needs to align themselves with all these anti-colonial movements, because these anti-colonial movements are inherently anti-capitalism. And if they can sow distrust for the capitalist system within all these colonial countries, that'll be a big step towards first implementing socialism and then using that as a stepping stone towards communism. But here's the interesting thing. The theory of the National Democratic Revolution was devised by Soviet theoreticians, and they I think it was in the 80s or like the late 70s, they themselves they came to the conclusion that this is not working. Everywhere we try this, we use the same recipe, but everywhere the cake fails, and they abandoned it. The Soviets abandoned the National Democratic Revolution theory. But the interesting thing is, forces like the ANC still use it. They still subscribe to that theory, this idea of the liberation is the first step, and then socialism is the second step, and then communism is the third and final step, and then we live in utopia. And they haven't gotten the wake-up call that even their Soviet heroes have abandoned this theory.
That's right.
So so the ANC is almost like a time capsule. It's this weird phenomenon of people still clinging to a discredited ideology and theory.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm remembering something that's written in the book, and that is when the transformation happened, the Cold War ended, the USSR collapsed, and the Soviets basically retreated from South Africa. Somehow or other, this momentum of communism kept going in ANC circles, and it was, the seeds were planted and they flourished into I don't know into what, but they into weeds, I guess. I don't know. They didn't flower, but they're there and they're prevalent and they're not going away. It is. There's communism and then there's race-based communism, and that's what really frightens me. And like I've said to your buddy and my buddy, Rational Gent, and many others that I've talked to who are in South Africa. I pray for you guys, and I admire, and that's not even a nearly strong enough word, the courage, the fortitude to stand tall and to preach the truth and fight for what's yours. And so many have. It feels so hopeless, and so many are leaving if they can. It's those communist roots, I don't even, the ANC is just, it's I don't, who knows what's in their hearts and minds, other than they don't seem to want white people in their country. That's one thing.
To get back to the topic of your book, well, more you as a person than you as the author of your book. Do you have any friends or family that stay in South Africa or expats, or do you have any connection to ex-South Africans or current South Africans?
Yeah, no, I have lots of friends here in Vancouver and other parts of Canada that are South African. One thing I'll say about them and within the country, but one thing I'll say about the South Africans I know and love here in Vancouver, unbelievable people. I mean, their character is up here. Their work ethic is up here. Their ability to achieve is off the charts. It's unbelievable. And forget all that. They're the first guys to host a barbecue or a braai. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, it's a braai.
Thank you. They're fun-loving people too, and they love life. So I'm blown away, and I'm thinking,
we have a song in Afrikaans that goes, "Afrikaners is plesierig," which translates to Afrikaners are just love to party and have a good time. And I do think
they know when to pull the chute. They know when to pull the chute and go to work the next day. That's the difference.
Yeah, it's that discipline. It's an idea of, yes, there's work and there's play. You shouldn't have just one in your life. You shouldn't just have one dominate your entire life, but at the same time, you can't just indulge constantly. You also have a responsibility. And I always use this metaphor now that you say South Africans have such a good work ethic and they're so successful. Like I told you before the stream, I read an article the other day that Afrikaner South Africans are the highest earning ethnic bracket in New Zealand now. And I always use a metaphor to explain this. So look at pine trees. Pine trees developed in fucking cold environment, but they have to grow in the snow, and there's not a lot of resources. It's very fucking dry at sometimes. But then you plant them in a place like Australia or South Africa, and they absolutely flourish, because now they're put in this situation like, oh wow, the sun always shines, it doesn't snow, what the fuck, dude, I'm gonna just expand as much as I can. And I think that's what a lot of South Africans are as well. Is you take them out of this very harsh, hyper-competitive environment where laws are implemented against them, where they are constantly discriminated against them according to their race. And you put them in an environment like Australia or Canada or the US, where they don't have that handicap. And suddenly they just can't, they don't have enough arms to grab all the opportunities.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. And I have a few examples of guys that just flourished beyond what is imaginable. And one guy I'm thinking of in particular lived in Vancouver, a good friend of mine, actually recently moved to New Zealand, and I only keep in touch with him through Facebook now, but just a stellar guy. One of the best people I've ever met. He's got 2 kids, beautiful family. You also asked me about people within South Africa. So 2 sides to that. One is the South Africans I know here in Vancouver. They know I've written this book, and some are happy to talk about it. Some are really, really, a big fan of the book, and are so curious. And others are a little bit, and and I know why. They're petrified and deeply, deeply worried about their relatives that are still in the country. and they have to kind of it's almost too hard to face, and I have to give those people a lot of room because I know what they're going through. So there is that, and then in terms of people in the country, when I was doing my research for the book, I talked to a lot of people, many that you haven't heard of and some that you have. Like I mentioned, Simon Roche, Saitlanders. What a guy. I mean, he responded to me. He spent a lot of time on the phone with me. He helped me with cultural things. He helped me, just courage that, he said he'll fight, he'll stay until he'll have urine and feces running down his ankles, but he'll stand guard and he won't surrender ever. Just unbelievable courage.
Yeah, unbelievable. If I could recommend a book, if anyone listening and you yourself as well, if you want to read a book about the history of South Africa and what made us what we are today, I recommend the book The Mind of South Africa, A Story of the Rise and Fall of Apartheid by Alistair Sparks. It's an incredible
book. When was it published?
Let me check. I have it here in my hand. It was published in 1990.
1990. Okay, a little dated, but yeah, it was a good read though, eh?
No, it's an incredible read. It gives you the entire fucking history of South Africa, and it's made for international audiences, someone that doesn't have that common knowledge. And that's something I do find a bit irritating about foreigners that tune in or just follow me on Twitter or whatever, is that I do realize that their knowledge of South Africa's history or just contemporary South Africa is very limited. No offense to all the foreigners listening in. And it gets tiring just having to explain basic things. Like, for example, that the blacks in South Africa aren't just one homogenous group. They're a bunch of cultures that hate each other almost as much as they hate other races. It's this idea of the tensions between the cultures are even more, the cleavages there are even bigger. And now I want to ask you, have you ever had, what's your experience of crime in Canada? Is it absolutely utopia? Do you have some crime there?
Yeah, no, it's a super good question. And, I was telling the Rational Gent the other day, my dad passed away recently. In September, so it's almost been a year, and we sold his house and we had a big party a couple weeks ago. Full-on open invite, come one, come all, no fence, no security guard, bring everyone in, strangers. There was people wandering around. I didn't know who they were. Multiracial, didn't think anything of it. Vancouver's very peaceful, very peaceful. There's nowhere I feel I can't go, and like I said, I'm a little worried that might be changing with the current administration led by the incomparably idiotic Justin Trudeau. There's tens of thousands of unknowns walking across the border as we speak. But yeah, Vancouver, limited crime. There's property crime. There's definitely property crime. I'd like to say we don't have to lock our doors at night or our cars, but we do. There's a drug issue. Downtown East Side is not great, but no violent crime. Very little violent crime. There's it's very multiracial, very Asian. I think we're probably over 40% a visible minority, which I start to find to be an interesting term, given that the minority that's visible is obviously starting to be no more a minority. But I don't worry for my safety. Toronto, like I said, is different, and there's this little cancer of lawlessness that's infecting parts of Canada. It's infected many cities, many American cities. We talked about that earlier, and those little cancerous pockets are growing. And they're emboldened, more and more dysfunctional lawlessness, and entitled criminality, and violence, race-based violence. It's emerging. It's emerging, and it's very scary. We don't have that now. And again, that's partly why I want to write this book. Why would I write it when I'm not experiencing it? That is exactly why. I have the freedom. I can tell these things. You know, I say these unpopular truths. I hope it doesn't deprive me of my ability to make a living. I hope that I don't get ostracized or demonized or smeared. But I'm writing books and I'm telling the truth and I'm showing things that happen out there in the world in places like South Africa and parts of America, and they're coming here. My next book, by the way, title to be determined or to be revealed, I'd say, coming in probably December, is set more in Canada. It's a global feel, and it's futuristic. It shows where this is all going. It shows where it's all going. And one thing that you'll find interesting, I find interesting anyway, is that I'm getting a lot of inspiration from the resistance movements, modern day resistance movements, like Saintlanders, Afra Forum, guys like you, like Willem Petzer, like the Rational Gent. I'm getting a lot of inspiration from people like you that are recognizing the danger. I mean, the danger's been around in your part of the world for many decades. So I go into the future in this next one, and I show the ultimate outcome of rabid identity politics and pitting groups against one another and race-based socialism. And, you know, so that's where I'm going with it. But to answer your question, your initial question, yeah, Vancouver, pretty safe place. Pretty safe place.
Yeah.
I'm going to go out for a walk in the sun. It's a beautiful day. It's Friday. It's still morning where I am. Once we're done here, I'm going to go out and enjoy some sun. There is a little bit of smoke in the air. There's a lot of forest fires burning in the interior of British Columbia. What we don't have any buses. We don't have any trains or hospitals burning, no schools. So yeah, pretty safe.
You're lucky, man, and appreciate it while you can. I do think the first time I was mugged, it felt like this was my initiation to becoming a South African. I don't know anyone that hasn't been affected by crime. For example, one of my good friends this year, he got a flat tire next to the road in like in the business sector of like a city, and he was standing there and he saw these two guys walking up to him, and he thought they were coming to help him, and no, they were coming to rob him. And they took out a knife and they walked up to him like, "Oh, we want everything you have." And he thought he caught their bluff. He's like, "No, fuck you, I'm not going to give you anything." And then one of them took a stab at him and he blocked it with his arm. They stabbed through his hand, and then he was like, "Oh shit, wait, these guys mean business." So he bolted and jumped over a fence, fell into some other person's garden, fucking scratched himself up. But yeah, no, it's a constant reality of South Africa. We're pretty adaptable to the fact. It reminds me of a documentary I watched a while back, Hypernormalization, where they talk about the idea of the Soviets when the general populace started to realize this is not working. This is the country around them is falling apart. But they didn't want to accept it. So they went into a state of hypernormalization where they just went about their day like nothing's wrong, nothing's going on. And they just lived this fake existence in this fantasy world.
It's the only way you can do it. I mean, well, it's not the only way because you're not doing that. But I read on Twitter the other day some white liberal South African, and someone commented, "Unbelievable that you still have white liberals in South Africa." And
cough, Adrian Basson.
Yeah. Yeah, you might have saw that very comment. But yeah, there's a few of them out there, and I see you guys debating, and you know, it's interesting to see the dialogue. It's really and Ernst Roots. I mean, that guy and his organization, just relentless passion and courage, and pushing the message of truth, and trying to do it from a reasonable standpoint amid such danger. It's unbelievable.
Right. Now, another question I have for you is, why do, from your own perspective, why do you think the Western world, I have my own answer for this question, but why do you think the Western world is so infatuated with South Africa? Why do they, at the moment, I can feel the world's eyes on us. I can feel people monitoring this situation very closely. Where do you think that comes from, that idea of everyone having their eyes on South Africa, seeing what's happening here?
Yeah. Well, the answer for me, and I'll try to answer it generically, but for me, and I didn't invent this term, but it's the canary in the coal mine. Obviously, this is our future 20 years down the road. I look at Europe, I see our future 10 years down the road. But this cancerous lawlessness, this cognitive dissonance from reality is just, I mean, it's all concentrated in South Africa. I mean, the inmates are running the asylum, and it's breaking down. The infrastructure is not being maintained. It's unsustainable. Everything about it is unsustainable. Everyone knows it, and yet we still have, as I said, we still have white liberals that are pretending everything is normal. Hyper normalization, to use your phrase. So that's why I'm fascinated. I think a lot of the world, even subconsciously, even if they can't even bring themselves to say it, is fascinated for the very same reason. What are your thoughts?
Before I name my thoughts, everyone in the chat, thank you for joining in and tuning in. I'm very appreciative of it. I hope you're enjoying the conversation so far. Please hit that like button to help me get noticed a bit more on the YouTube algorithm. And if you also check out the channel or the video description, you'll see a link to the book that we're talking about, the Never, Never and Never Again book by K.M. Breakey. You can go check it out there. There's a link for you. Also a link to his website. Go check it out. And now to answer your question, I think the world's infatuated with South Africa because South Africa is the world's diversity experiment. I think if people want to see, like you said, want to see what how a diverse society functions. Now, let's for a moment just take out the historical factors impacting South Africa's current situation. Okay. I think the world, if you just look at it from a diverse society's perspective, there are two camps in the world. And I think the left and the right are infatuated with South Africa because the left desperately wanted to succeed, because that would show that the theory of our strength in diversity makes us stronger, that idea, that will prevail, and that South Africa will rise above adversity and become a world power. Then you have the right, which is, to an extent, because they are traditionalists and are not, and look at the world as realists almost, want to see what happens. They are also curious about what happens when a society becomes as diverse as South Africa. As you said, I think a lot of Americans and Europeans want to know, have a little peek into the future, because they can see their societies diversifying. I think it's an inevitable consequence of globalization that you can't just keep society as it is. It's going to change, and it's going to diversify through immigration. And a lot of people are feeling uncertain about it. A lot of people are feeling scared about it. And they just want some reassurance. So they want to see, what will the future that my children will live in, what would it look like? And that's where the two camps come in. You have the one camp of people, and they might not be right or left. You just have this one camp of people that desperately want to see South Africa fail, to be able to say that, yes, diversity doesn't work. This is the result, and people should be fucking worried. We need to make decisions now in our own countries that we don't end up like that. Then you have the other side of the coin of people that say, no, it's going to work. We desperately want it to work because South Africa will prove that Europe and America and all these countries that are feeling the brunt of mass immigration are actually on the right track. And this is going to benefit us in the long run. So that's my answer to that question.
Yeah, no, that's a good answer. And I mean, there's a lot of parallels between what I was saying and what you're saying. I got an example for you here in Canada. I mentioned that our border has become porous because of a tweet. Literally because of a tweet that Justin Trudeau sent out probably 2 months ago.
Before you continue, I'm just going to get another beer, so you can keep talking. I'll be back in 1 minute.
Oh, yeah. Do you want me to keep talking?
Yeah, keep talking. Keep the audience busy with your beer.
So what I'm saying is Trudeau opened the world. The border, Canada is open. Come one, come all. And our border became very porous, specifically one opening in Quebec. And what's happened recently, so tens of thousands have come in since and continue to pour in. And one of the conservative MPs, a French Canadian by the name of Maxime Bernier, he's a right-leaning fellow. He what did he say? He said recently in a tweet, he said, diversity is fine. We like diversity. We have to be careful of extreme diversity. And he kind of defined that And it kind of made sense. It's like, yeah, we want people to kind of assimilate and build a high trust society. That was the message. I tell you, he was attacked relentlessly. It was this was a dog whistle for white supremacists. This was he was brutalized, absolutely brutalized. So again, this is a small example. He wasn't even telling a controversial truth. He was telling one that was just slightly right of the acceptable tiny little script that people are allowed to say, and he was brutalized.
Right.
I mean,
and that gets back to that idea of the Overton window. I think we're entering a time now where for a long time, so many topics have been taboo that people weren't even able to talk about the real problems that we have. And that gets back to that idea of that AA meeting, that idea, if you aren't even allowed to acknowledge that you have a problem, how are you able to solve it then?
Yeah.
And I do think we're entering a time now where a large amount of people and a growing amount of people says, no, we have a problem and we need to address it, not by going far right or far left. We just need to have a conversation where everyone is engaged and people can actually speak what's on their minds.
Yeah. Yeah. And back to Colin Flaherty. And if you haven't checked him out, and if your audience hasn't, I recommend you look him up. Colin Flaherty. He's written a couple books as well, all on black on white violence. I mean, his thing is, it's not only the black on white violence. That's problem number one. But the bigger problem is the lies, deceit, and delusion of the mainstream media. They will not name this problem. They cannot bring themselves to and anyone that gets even close to hinting that, hey, maybe there is a correlation in black violent crime, and maybe it's twice as much as other races. Maybe it's 3 times, 5 times, 10 times, 100 times the level of other races. And you think I'm exaggerating, and I claim I might not be, because there's all sorts of mechanisms in place, as there is in South Africa for that matter, to dilute the numbers. People don't report. What used to be felonies are now misdemeanors. There's all sorts of things that the system is doing to mute this problem that Colin's.
Now, my perspective on that is it's not a race thing. It's definitely a culture thing. You have to look at the types of values that are propagated within certain communities and the types of values or lifestyles that are glorified. I think you just have to look at, for example, the music industry that emerges. Well, the music industry's target market of, for example, the black community. A lot of these rappers and a lot of these songwriters, they glorify gangsterism and they glorify crime. And I think the black community in America and South Africa has a lot more potential than it's reaching, but just because culturally it's not willing to do some introspection. You should really just. And I think that's for most cultures, the idea of, and the Afrikaner culture as well, is that if the flaws that I do see at the moment in the Afrikaner culture as well are persisting because Afrikaners aren't willing to look in the mirror and do some introspection. And I expect the same from black cultures as well, is that yes, every culture and every community has problems and they only persist because you're not willing to do introspection, because it's going to be hard and it's going to hurt and it's going to be embarrassing. But at the end of the day, if you just do that, if you're just honest with yourself, then you're going to be able to start working on solutions. I always like to boil down cultures and communities as if they are people. Now, you can condense, for example, the black community or the white community or whatever. It's very oversimplified, but you can condense them almost into an individual. And if you send that individual to a psychologist, he will be able to pinpoint certain problems that if you just address them, and you just admit that you have these problems, we can start working on some solutions. But that means we have to untaboo a lot of these topics. Yeah. And that's something I'm trying to do, is that we can have rational discussions about the flaws. We can talk about the flaws in Afrikaner culture. We can talk about the flaws in Zulu culture. We can talk about the flaws in colored culture. Every culture has its own unique flaws, but the only way to solve them, or to try at least and work on solutions, is we have to be able to acknowledge them.
Yeah. And that, to use your AA analogy, is step one in their 12-step program. And that, many would say, would be the hardest step, to acknowledge the problem. And it's not happening. To follow on your thought there, in my third novel, Johnny and Jamal, which explores black on white violence and black dysfunction and the whole racial mix, going back in time, exploring the history, my solution, as voiced through one of the characters, one of the main characters, is kind of exactly what you said, and that is the role models that are held up right now in Black America are not necessarily good for Black America, and so I basically postulated that we need an emerging tide of Black conservatives that are truth tellers and speaking the truth. Oddly enough, we are starting to see that with people like Candace Owens. And then, some names that I mentioned in the book in this spirit, unbelievable guys. Jesse Lee Peterson, if you've not looked up that guy, that guy's amazing. Larry Elder, more pop culture, a little lighter, very humorous guy, but truth teller. There are many, and they're emerging. And we need, to borrow a phrase I used in the book, we need a critical mass. We need a critical mass. And I see the work Candace Owens is doing. And it's tough. I mean, because they get attacked from the quote Black community. They get called every name in the book, the Uncle Tom. So I don't know. You tell me, are you seeing such a movement at all in South Africa? I'm not aware of it at all.
Yeah, example that comes to mind now, before I go into that, a thing that we see, for example, especially in South Africa and in America in terms of the Black community, is the shaming of people that think differently. People that are offering solutions, but they're hard solutions. They might not be convenient facts, but they are voicing some truth. And they are shamed as Uncle Toms and as just slaves of the white man or whatever. Now, when you told me about these voices, I remembered something that was tweeted out by Germ. Now, he's a South African cartoonist.
I know.
He tweeted out that, and I quote, "There are those who overcome obstacles, and there are those who blame everything and get nowhere. Herman Mashaba grew up poor." Now, Herman Mashaba is the current mayor of Johannesburg, and he's affiliated with the DA, and he's a businessman. His mother was a maid. He refused to be oppressed and became a successful businessman in spite of apartheid. Difficult, yes, but he did it. Learn from him. And I do think these are the type of role models that you want to see. These are the type of role models you want to elevate and start using as examples. People that overcame adversity, overcame their obstacles, and rose to the top. And I do have a lot of respect for them. I'm a big Herman Mashaba fan for a plethora of reasons.
Yeah. No, I'll have to look that up. Interesting. In the book I'm writing right now, I wrote some dialogue recently. And there, it's one of the basically a right-leaning guy versus a left-leaning guy. And the right-leaning guy says, it's not that you're oppressed. It's that you are actively, eagerly looking for anything that's oppressing. And that's the spirit of I hate to say it, that victimhood culture is the essence of the Black community in America. And
victimhood sells.
Pardon me?
Victimhood sells.
Victimhood sells. Yeah. Victimhood sells. And it's very profitable. I mean, the government, and let's be honest, the Black America has this, I mean, the history is obviously undeniable, from slavery, Jim Crow, all the suppression of rights, and there's a lot of toxic history there. Now, from MLK's time, and MLK preached this beautiful message, and I gained somewhat, as I characterized Mandela, there's the man and there's the myth. It's the same with MLK. There's the man and the myth, and the myth is a beautiful, beautiful thing. I mean, judge not by the color of skin, but by the content of character. Well, we don't hear that anymore from the left. We just hear everything is the fault of white people of color, people, the POC term, which I find very offensive, because it basically just it unites a bunch of disparate communities that have one thing and one thing only in common, and that is hatred of whites or feeling that they're being oppressed by whites. But so we're demonized. So MLK's message has been washed out, diluted, erased, you name it. So yeah, I don't know. I forget where we were going with all that.
Yeah. So we have a question from the chat from the Ronaldo Ghost, who is a South African YouTuber. And he has a question for you, Mr. Breakey. He asks, and what have you ever wanted for? What have you ever wanted for in your life? Reason is I ask is because you are telling other people to get over things you have no comprehension over. Now I'll give you a moment to collect your thoughts. So basically, what he's asking, it seems, is how can you prescribe certain things to other cultures you have no knowledge of or don't know about what their experience is like? I hope I got his question right.
I don't know how to answer that question. I come back to what I know and love about Western civilization. Safe streets, opportunity for all, and a high trust society where my neighbor is my friend, and I know I can walk around safely. I can bring up my children in good faith and not worry that someone's going to break into my house in the middle of the night and chop me into little bits with a hatchet or shoot me or rob me in the street because I've got a flat tire. That's what I want in life. And I have it today, but I see it slipping away. And that's what worries me. That's why I write the books. Simple.
Yeah. And I think that fiction and we talked about this before we started the stream, is the idea of fiction is a very powerful tool. Because if you look at history, a lot of people, and this is a theory I've talked about a lot with some of my mates, and this is the idea of life imitates art. So a lot of the times, a lot of young people read fiction when they're younger. And then when they get older and a lot of them get into positions of power, these fictional works that they read, let's say it's, for example, Ayn Rand, or, let's give them a little bit of a leeway. Let's say they read like stories of Atlantis, or they read about, or like works about steampunk societies, and this, or they get installed with these ideas of utopia. Yeah. And then they grow up and they get into positions of power. And now they actually have the opportunity to start moving the real world chess pieces. Now, you tell me, don't you think those people in those positions of power would not be tempted to then use their power to try and realize that world, that utopia that was instilled in them through fiction when they were younger?
Yeah, I agree totally. And the most liberal people are those that are farthest from the tip of the spear. And it's the people, the whites that are in power. I'm not sure who that individual that asked the question is, but if you are apart from the troubles, if you are apart from the violence in the streets, it's very easy to look idealistically at things. And let's be honest, multiculturalism, it sounds beautiful. Everyone gets along, everyone's equal. We don't, it's a beautiful, beautiful concept. I was indoctrinated by it. Somehow or other, I got red pilled. I look around Vancouver and, most of my friends, some privately are red pilled. Some are privately they support Trump. They do it quietly. But a lot of them are militantly divorced from reality. And they don't see any danger. I asked them about Sweden and how, 600,000 migrants into a population of 10 million, unassimilatable, if that's a word, pumped into the country in 5 years. And what did we have? We had 80 cars burned the other night. I put that in front of them. They don't want to talk about that. That's something we won't talk about. So, people that are in power and, people that were inspired by fiction and grew up as I did with this utopian view. Some people, I guess they just never get rid of that. I got red pilled. That's why I want to push my books and I want to red pill other liberals. And not that I want to destroy. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Finish that thought. No, finish that thought. You don't want to destroy?
Well, I don't want to, if the culture is good and it's working, I don't want to disrupt that. But I feel that there's a threat. There's a grave threat. And that's, and I mean, we see it. And we've already talked about that.
That's my stance as well, is that I would love nothing more than the Rainbow Nation dream that was sold to us in 1994 to realize. I want that South Africa. I want that to work. Yeah. But at the moment, it's not realizing. And we're in a pretty bad situation at the moment, economically, socially, whatever. And you can see an increasing amount of people wanting alternative solutions. We need to find a better way to try and fix the problems that we have now. And that connects to one of my friends, Willem Petzer, you've mentioned him. He made a documentary a while back called Crime Free Urania. That's about this now, about this little town in South Africa in the middle of the desert that's exclusively Afrikaner Boer. And you can live there. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, or whatever. You just have to assimilate into their culture. So that's kind of their filter. That's how they keep it homogenous almost. So the fact that if you don't assimilate to their religion, values, culture, language, you can fuck off. They're not going to accommodate you. But the interesting thing about that documentary and how I read it was, it's not made to to take the black community of South Africa and rub their noses in it and like say, wow, look at this white ethnic state, look how crime free it is, you can't do this, wahaha. That's not the point. The point is, it shows here's a system that's working. South Africa has a big crime problem. This relates to the theme of the stream, the idea of South African crime. So the idea that I got from the stream and the idea that from the documentary and from Arania's values is the idea of here's a system that's working. We see the rest of South Africa battling with crime, but we have a system here that's actually allowing us to leave our doors unlocked. Most of the houses there, if not the vast majority, don't even have burglar bars on them. So then the bottom line is this can be achieved in other communities as well. You just need to follow our formula. You need to adopt the values that we use in this town, or this system rather. This almost libertarian aspect, or this libertarian approach. And you just have to look at like the hierarchy of Arania. They don't keep their knowledge to themselves. They are actively doing outreaches to the towns in their surrounding area. And they're trying to help other communities, not white communities, black communities, to help them also emulate this idea, to also create crime-free societies and societies that work, societies that are not dependent on the government, or parasitically dependent on the government rather, for services and safety and resources, but they do it themselves. That's why the logo of Arania is a little boy. It's called the klein reus, the small giant, of a little boy rolling up his sleeves and basically saying, I'm going to do it myself. Fuck you. You can go that way. I'm going to do this how I think should be done. And I don't need you for anything. And that's why the town is so successful, because they're completely self-sufficient. Majority of the houses there are solar powered. They get all their water from the Orange River. They only use their own labor. You're not allowed to use labor from outside the town in the town itself. So the irony is, South Africa has an unemployment rate between 30 and 35%, depending on whose stats you take. But Arania actually has an employment problem. They are actually trying to get more people, because they are only restricted to using their own labor. They don't have enough people to build the houses and actually do the labor that they have in the town. For example, the biggest export is pecan nuts. So when I was there, I saw a farm where two guys, they go into this pecan nut grove, and they have this steampunk style machine that they hook up to the trees, and it shakes the shit out of it. All the nuts fall to the ground. They have this industrial fan, and they blow all the nuts into one heap, and then two guys pick it up, and they do the work of like 500 people.
Wow. Yeah, that's very cool. I saw the documentary, and it was good. I mean, and he's doing fantastic work. And I think he's just turned 22. I think I saw that. Like, it's phenomenal. Like, what was I doing at 22? And this ties back to what you said earlier with that hot furnace. Although you used the cold environment, but I call it, you guys are being forged in a hot furnace, and you're coming out hard and competent and incredibly resourceful. So, I mean, I look at Arania, probably mispronouncing that, but I just look at it as a community where, you know, in the simplest terms, everyone's pulling in the same direction on the rope. Everyone's pulling in the same direction. And, you know, there's a scene I wrote in my forthcoming novel, and it follows up 9/11. And 9/11, obviously, that was a significant event in American history and in world history. And I still remember the mood of the nation. And I say the nation, I mean US and Canada kind of combined. And it was one of intense unity and goodwill. And you know, I wasn't in New York at the time, but from what I could gather, people wandering around the streets is like they couldn't help their neighbor enough. And there's this powerful uniting force in that, you know, we just went through trauma together, and we're all on the same team. And you know, ultimately, we're united in good versus evil, and whoever did this to us is evil. So those are powerful, powerful uniting forces that that community had for a very limited time, and soon enough, within a couple weeks, the grievances and the differences, everything, and all the BS came back to the fore, and that post 9/11 immediate feeling of gratitude and goodwill toward your neighbor, it went away. That's the reality day to day, I claim, in places like Arania. That's that's the unity that actually built a country like America, where everyone is united in the spirit of what once was America, and we're all pulling on the rope in the same direction. And it's amazing what you can achieve when you collectively, everyone is, we're not looking to be victims. We're trying to help. And it's not about ego. It's about community. That's Arania. That's what built America. And now we have strong forces of disunity. And so the corollary to what I said is that if you have strong forces of disunity, what does that do to a country? Well, I don't think it's going to do anything too good. Put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I hear you. So we've come to the end of the stream, and I just want to thank you again for coming on. This was an incredibly interesting and engrossing conversation. I'll definitely have you on again in the future, maybe while you're writing, or maybe after you've written your next work. And now I just want to ask you. Yeah, I hear it's quite a business to write a book. It sounds easy, but as soon as you start, dude, you start realizing, it's actually quite hard.
It's all consuming. It's fun.
Do you have any final thoughts you want to leave the audience with? And you can also use this opportunity just to advertise your work again. I don't mind. So the floor is yours.
Final thoughts would be, have a look at the book. There it is. You can find it on Amazon. Can everyone see that? Amazon, Kobo, Amazon's best. And I don't know who your audience is, Caracol, but I say South Africans will enjoy the book because you guys will be, you'll understand that we understand what's going on. Everyone knows what's going on, left and right. But people that really need to read the book, I think, are people outside of South Africa that are living in a dream world, cognitive dissonance from reality. Those are the ones I'm really after. That's why I wrote the book. That, and because I sleep better at night. So that's it. And I appreciate a lot you having me on. So thank you very much.
Yeah, that's absolutely no problem. Icicle Fledgling says in the chat, cheers, Mr. Achy Breakey.
That song ruined my life in 1992.
So I'll finish the stream with my own thoughts. Thanks again for coming on. Thanks for everyone that tuned in. I immensely appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come listening to us just chat some bicky ball. And now I just want to remind you that there is a link to Mr. Breakey's book in my description of the video. There's also a link to his website and his Twitter. Please check it out. Go give him a follow on Twitter. And then I just want to end on this idea that, and it kind of links back to the theme of the stream, this idea of crime and this big problem that South Africa has. I think even though South Africa, a lot of our problems stem from the idea that we're almost too diverse. I do think a lot of the groups can learn from each other. We all have our own flaws. You all have our own strengths. And if we just encourage more intergroup conversations and inter-ideology conversations like I've had on my channel, what I try to do with Stream of Consciousness, I think we can actually make the situation a lot better. But also, we need to be able to discuss things that are seen as taboo. But also, we need to be able to encourage people to do some introspection. I mean, introspection is hard. You can ask any psychologist, all their patients, their biggest problem is they don't want to look in the mirror. They don't want to blame themselves. They want to blame some scapegoat out there, some boogeyman, whether that be the Jews or the white man or the Illuminati or whatever. That's much more attractive to a person that has flaws or a person that has problems. Blame the world rather than yourself. And I want to encourage everyone listening today, in your own life, but also as a collective, as everyone listening, as a collective of South Africans or Americans or Afrikaners or Boers or whatever, you shouldn't be afraid of doing introspection. You should be open to the idea of discussing your flaws, facing your flaws, and taking a hard look in the mirror, and then as soon as you identify your flaws, you should be open to the idea of listening to other people's advice on how to deal with them. There are more people than you like to imagine that are willing to help, that are willing to give advice. But when on the topic of flaws, you're going to have to do some hard conversations. It's not going to be nice. It's not going to be all moonshine and roses. It's going to be tough. It's not going to be incredibly satisfying to talk about your problems and talk about your issues, because nobody wants to do that. But that's what's going to be needed, not just you as an individual, but also South Africa as a society. And that's the idea that I will end the stream on. So thank you once again. Yeah, thank you again, Mr. K and Breakey. I'll definitely have you on in the future. You can discuss your progress with your future works. My DMs are always open. And thank you again for everyone that tuned in to episode 8 of Stream of Consciousness. My channel's going great. We're at 1,100 subscribers now. And I couldn't ask for more. Thank you very much for making this channel what it is and always supporting it and tuning in when this goes live. So cheers, guys, and have a good one.
Thanks, friend. Have a good weekend.